How concerned are you about this Pentagon review into AUKUS?
Well, you take it seriously, but I don't think you overinterpret it. I think it is not uncommon for new administrations to do reviews into programs of this size and scale, while somewhat a little bit different, but similarly in the UK, the Starmer government initiated a review, and that review actually resulted in an even stronger commitment to AUKUS. So, I think from that point of view, that should not be surprising. But one should take it seriously with agreements of this size and scale. It's important to be always making the case, always building the alliance and the relationship, and always be looking to add value, particularly with the changes in the strategic environment in which we're operating. And under the Trump administration, I think there's been a very significant rebalancing of where they're focusing their effort. They've been making very clear statements to allies and partners about lifting their level of investment and their level of contribution. That was the case certainly in Europe and NATO, and Australia's no stranger to that. So I don't think we're sort of isolated in this sense in terms of the US's interest. I think we're getting a very similar message that all allies and partners are, and I think we've got a very good story to sell when it comes to our commitment, but that commitment must continue to increase.
And so just on that, Elbridge Colby, Pentagon official, the Under-Secretary for Defence, he has been seen as the one driving this review. He has also made it very clear his view that Australia needs to do more on defence, as has Pete Hegseth, of course, the Defence Secretary. Is that what this review is really about, putting some more leverage or using leverage for Australia to lift its defence spending?
Well, I think there's certainly a correlation, but I'd make this point. I mean, Bridge Colby, the Under-Secretary, was formerly, prior to going into that role, was actually at American Global Strategy, so I know him reasonably well. And what Bridge has always really been particularly focused on is the production capability for US nuclear submarines, and whether they can really lift that production rate to where it needs to get to, that would enable them to be able to meet these commitments. Now, if that were unable to be achieved, and this is an issue that was raised during the Biden administration as well, by the way, so it's not a new issue, but it's one that he's raised in the past. He has initiated this review. This has not been initiated by the White House or indeed necessarily by the Defence Secretary, but it is certainly being done with their full knowledge and support, and we must engage with it. On the issue of lifting defence spending as a share of GDP, it's certainly Under-Secretary Colby has certainly made those points. I've made those points. Others have made those points. That's something I believe we should be doing in our own interests and in response to the escalating sort of environment we have in the Indo-Pacific. So, there's a way through this, and I think the US are asking those questions in an alliance, but AUKUS is a highest common denominator partnership. There are no passages in AUKUS, and Australia is certainly not one.
You point to Elbridge Colby's concern about their industrial base and the ability to produce enough Virginia-class submarines. We are committing $3 billion as part of the deal to help lift that industrial capacity in the US. Given what you've just said there about Under-Secretary Colby's concerns, does that number need to increase? Will Australia have to contribute more to that US industrial base?
I don't think that's the number at all. I think that number is quite unique, and I would defy anyone to nominate another defence agreement anywhere in the world with the US which has the partner investing in the US's defence industry base for production of submarines. So I think that actually stands us out. I think that is a model of relationship that the President would welcome very much.
So
it shows that we're not passengers.
That won't have to be increased, you don't think?
Well, look, I don't think that's the focus. I mean, the issue of focus on spending as a share of GDP is the broader capability, and the broader capability of being able to deliver in other areas, of course, where the US and other partners will want to rely and incorporate Australia's effort, because our defence, our strategic defence, particularly in the Indo-Pacific, depends absolutely on an alliance network and being able to play our role in that alliance network. That's where our defence and security comes from. This notion that I hear the critics of these arrangements and the US alliance thinking there is some other power out there that can provide that level of engagement and alliance to provide our security is honestly delusional. And so being part of this alliance and investing in that alliance and investing in our contribution in that alliance, which has clearly been lifted now, not just for Australia, but all allies and partners to 3% plus, that is not a surprise, and I don't think it's an overestimate of what the capability needs to be.
You're one of the few people who has spoken to Donald Trump about AUKUS. We have not heard him publicly make clear his commitment to it, but privately, are you satisfied, are you confident that President Trump is on board for AUKUS?
I've never had concerns about this, and I've never had any reason to. I know there's been lots of speculation about it, and a lot of self-fulfilling speculation about it, or at least seeking to be self-fulfilling, but that hasn't been my concern. I mean, there's a review underway. I think he'll take notice of what Bridge Colby says. And I think we need to engage with that and make the case again. Remember, it was during the first Trump administration when for a year we engaged with the officials, exactly like Bridge Colby and others within the US institutional defence system, to convince them of our capability to be able to do this with AUKUS. And remember, AUKUS isn't just about Virginia-class submarines. In fact, that's one part of it. The AUKUS submarines is what the original deal, that is the ones being done with the United Kingdom, and getting an agreement from the United States for the first time ever since the late 1950s to share that technology with Australia. That sits at the heart of the AUKUS deal, and I don't think there's any suggestion or question over that. And of course, AUKUS Pillar 2, which I know Bridge is a big fan of.
And look, I appreciate you don't want to breach private conversations here, but this is a big question for Australians. Just to be clear, has Donald Trump told you he wants AUKUS to proceed?
I don't go into my conversations with others, particularly post-politics. I have relationships with many people in the US and the UK. And I think I can be of most use if I continue to engage in those where I can and where I can be helpful in an unofficial capacity.
Notwithstanding your confidence that AUKUS will be okay, you point to some of the critics, and there are some former prime ministers amongst them who have their doubts about this and want us to walk away from it altogether. Do you think Australia should at least have a plan B should something fall over?
Look, I think the capability of having nuclear-powered submarines is essential to Australia's long-term strategic defence. I mean, the submarines we were going to buy would have been obsolete before they got wet. I mean, they weren't going to turn up until 2038. So some suggestion that they were going to be there in the early 2030s is just not true. It was never going to happen. And that was the choice that our government was faced with. We moved to a plan B that was actually better than plan A. And of course, difficult things are very challenging. And this is a big test of our resolve and our capability. But I'm not one of those defeatists who want to surrender to the idea which says Australia's just not up to it. I don't agree with that. I think Australia is up to it. I think the alliance is up to it. And I think it can be achieved. And I think that's a view that the government and I share.
Look, more broadly, there's still no guarantee a meeting will happen next week at the G7 in Canada between Anthony Albanese and Donald Trump. I don't think he's locked in any meetings, the President, at this stage. But how important is this meeting right now, in your view, and what should Anthony Albanese be expected to achieve in it?
Oh, these meetings are always important. My first meeting with President Trump was in Argentina at a G20, and we locked that in, but there was a very big one that we had at G7s and others, and as well as the private ones in the White House. So there was many engagements and many engagements over the phone as well. Of course they're important. They're our most important ally. And so it's critical that these take place and that relationships form and understandings form. And I had the same thing with President Biden. So it is important that this take place and that you seek to declutter the conversation with other issues that frankly don't go to the core of the interests in that relationship. You don't want any distractions. You want to be able to talk about the issues that are most important. And from Australia's perspective, obviously security is the most significant. But on the economic issues, I mean, back in 2019 when I went to the White House, the issue of critical minerals and rare earth supply chains was a matter we were talking about back then, and that led to our strategy on critical minerals, and that was followed up by this government. So there's much for us to talk about, and there's much for us to be able to work together on to secure a free and open Indo-Pacific, as the Japanese like to say, and we have that responsibility. So yes, a lot rests on it, and that's the job of the Prime Minister.
And just finally, I'm interested in your advice there to declutter the meeting. I mean, there are some big issues, right? There's AUKUS, there's the tariffs the US is imposing on Australia despite our free trade agreement. What do you mean by declutter? What should be the priorities?
Well, the priorities are just what I outlined. I mean, it should be the defence relationship and the economic relationship. I think on the economic relationship, I think we've got a pretty clear read on where things are going on the 10% base revenue tariffs. And Australia is in the same boat as everybody else on those things. Of course, there's the steel and manufacturing ones, and they're a different case. But in terms of across-the-board tariffs, they're far more discreet when it comes to steel and manufacturing. When it comes to defence, well, AUKUS is the main game. And I think, quite rightly, there would be a discussion about where Australia is heading. We made many commitments when you do in government. I made commitments on the emissions front, and you make commitments to set directions. And I think targets around spending as a share of GDP are good targets to set. We set them when we're in government, and we achieve them. We gave the commitment back in 2013 to hit 2%, and that was achieved. Now I think the stakes have been raised even further, and 3% is, I would say, a mid-tier goal, a mid to upper tier goal.